So, I mean, it's been how many years since we had to wait for this rematch? Chael Sonnen and Anderson Silva number 2. And so many things happened after the first fight. Suspensions, injuries, delays, things that were said in the media. And it's like a perfect build-up to a rematch. You know, we're having to wait to get it, and now we've actually got a set date and a time and a place where it's going to happen. And I'll tell you what, this card initially was going to be so huge just in general, because the original lineup had Sonnen and Silva, Faber and Cruz, Ortiz and Griffin, Franklin and Lee, Bisping and Boich. Those are 5 big fights, and that's a very stacked card. And I mean, I reckon the expectations were going to be through the roof. Unfortunately, you know, the injury plague that's been going on for the last year really hit the UFC and affected this card. But the fact is, Sonnen and Silva is a big enough fight to, you know, carry the load. And you still got Ortiz and Griffin, which is another fight I will talk about a bit later. Anyways, when the first fight happened, way back in 2010, and for me to actually talk about it, I actually need to go back to talk about when Sonnen fought Nate Marquardt. When Sonnen was on the horizon and he fought Nate Marquardt at that number 1 contenders fight, Nate Marquardt was the heavy favourite to win this fight. And everyone expected Nate Marquardt, it was a foregone conclusion that Nate Marquardt was going to win and face Anderson Silva in a rematch. And Sonnen started talking, and he started saying a lot of things in all the press, and people started to get interested. And then he fights Nate Marquardt, and I felt put on a very impressive display against him. He just viciously took him down, like dominated Nate Marquardt in a way that I didn't expect. Just repeatedly took him down, just pummeled him on the ground. He almost came close to losing though, and that came back to bite him in the ass later on, when he was in Marquardt's guard and he almost got caught in a submission, and he eventually gets out. Anyways, Chael puts on this very impressive performance against Marquardt, and then this rivalry between him and Anderson builds up even more with all these things that he said about him, and then the fight happens. And I thought about the fight, and I know a lot of people kept saying, oh, well, Anderson's just going to win this one hands down within the first round or the second round, whichever round he chooses, really. And I thought, actually, Chael is a perfect style to fight Anderson, a very aggressive wrestler with that kind of belief in his own mind that he can beat anyone. And Chael surpassed expectations in a lot of people's opinions. I reckon this. I believe Anderson's camp underestimated Chael a little bit. And I reckon they expected Chael to take Anderson down. They were not expecting Chael to beat him to the punch. And if you watch that fight in the first round, there were several instances where Chael, with those incredibly fast hands, tagged Anderson and even backed him up into the cage a few times, which is really surprising. And again, it was one of the most exciting and most dramatic fights of that year. And Chael was so close. And I don't care what anyone says. Anyone from Anderson Silva's camp had to be worried by the time round 4 started. Had to be worried, because Anderson was down by at least 3 to 4 rounds at this point, and Chael had won every single round convincingly, without question. And then Chael has that lapse in concentration, and Anderson catches him in a submission and beats him in a great ending to a great fight. And everyone was so pumped up. No one wanted to see Vitor versus Anderson right away. They wanted to see Sonnen versus Anderson, number 2. And it looked like it was going to happen. And then unfortunately, Chael's suspension got in the way. And then other things happened that looked like Chael wasn't going to have a place in MMA for a while. And then Chael eventually came back, and he impressed everyone again for a guy that was off for a year to come out and just convincingly beat Brian Stann in such a one-sided fashion. It was a very impressive fight. And yet again, we thought we were going to see the rematch, and then it didn't happen. And then we saw instead Bisping versus Sonnen. And that was a very, very, very close fight, to the point where many people are using that fight to question whether or not Chael could beat Anderson or do the same thing to Anderson this time. And my thought is, Bisping has improved greatly. Bisping has better wrestling defense than Anderson Silva. Most wrestlers that he's fought have a hard time not just taking him down, but keeping him down. Bisping is very tenacious, and he always eventually works his way back up. And Bisping has improved a lot more than people give him credit for. And you also got to take into account that that was a fight on maybe 2 weeks' notice. So who knows, what kind of factors came into play. I wouldn't be surprised if we see them two fight again as well, and that's another big fight. Anyways, so eventually we get to Chael versus Silva number 2, and a lot of thoughts and a lot of opinions about what's going to happen. Funny thing is, Chael has said a lot of hilarious things, as always, and people are always getting on his case. Oh, he's making it like pro wrestling, but that pro wrestling element has added so much value and so much interest to this fight. And people can moan and whine, but people like him and Ronda Rousey, and even Tito Ortiz in his heyday, they're needed. You need people like that because they generate, and I mean generate, interest in a fight. And it's also a great opportunity for someone else on the card, because the media attention that Chael and Silva is going to warrant is a great opportunity for an up-and-coming fighter, someone like Mike Easton, who's a great prospect at bantamweight, to make a name for himself on that card, and he could build his name off of that card, or even a John Alessio or a Shane Roller. It's a tremendous opportunity for fighters if they're smart and they think about it. Anyways, thinking about the fight itself, I don't know. I mean, I've watched the first fight, and I think it's going to be very similar to the first fight. Although, I think... Alright, let me think about it. Chael will take him down. I guarantee that Chael can take him down. And I expect Chael to really push forward with the takedowns. I think that Anderson's camp are going to be more prepared now for Chael's boxing, which I don't think they really prepared themselves for. Chael's got good hand speed, and that's probably the thing that threw them off the most, more than anything. So I expect that they're going to be prepared for that. Who's going to win the fight? I mean, I wouldn't be surprised if Anderson wins. I wouldn't be surprised if he goes straight away in the first round and gets him with something, ends it that way. Or it's similar to the first fight where Chael takes him down, works from the top position, is winning the fight, and Anderson catches him in a submission. But Chael is a smart man, and I hope that Chael's worked on his submission defense. Another thing, though, that makes me think about this fight is Chael's history with rematches. And I can't help but think of the Paulo Filho fight in the WEC. And for those of you who don't know about this, Chael fought Paulo Filho for the WEC middleweight title the first time, and Chael was winning the fight, and then Chael left himself open, and he wound up getting caught into a submission, I believe, and lost the fight. And then he had to work his way back to have a rematch with Paulo Filho. And unfortunately, Filho couldn't make the weight. So it was a non-title fight. And Chael beats him anyways. And Chael really worked very hard in not repeating the same mistakes. And in a lot of ways, he's the uncrowned WEC middleweight champion. And funnily enough, Paulo Filho sent him the belt. Actually, it was quite a classy act. Anyways, so I look at things like that and I think, could the same principles apply here in this fight with Silva? Is Chael going to repeat the same kind of thing he did against Paulo Filho? Learn from the mistakes he made in the first fight and really work diligently, and I believe he will, work diligently to correct them. And in that case, I wouldn't be surprised if Sonnen beats him. To be honest with you, I wouldn't be surprised if it's a very, very close fight. And if Sonnen edges it out, we see a rematch and we see Sonnen versus Silva. And I guarantee you, I think this is going to be a trilogy series myself. So I wouldn't be surprised if that happens. And I think people really want to see this fight. And, if there's a third fight, I wouldn't mind seeing it. It's definitely been an exciting feud and one of the best rivalries we've had in MMA in quite some time. Anyways, as for the rest of the card and the other things that are going on, Tito Ortiz and Forrest Griffin, kind of like an end of an era. I mean, I grew up on the Tito Ortiz era in a lot of ways. Tito Ortiz is one of the guys that renewed my interest in the UFC with his antics and his charisma and the way he carried himself, and the rivalry with Ken Shamrock and Chuck Liddell and some of the fights he had prior to that got my interest, and we kind of grew up on him. And it's kind of sad to see, this is going to be his last fight from all accounts, and he's even said, yeah, this is my last fight, I'm retiring. And it would be nice to see him come out with a win. Do I think that's going to happen? If he takes Forrest down early and pounds him and catches him, because Forrest's not known to have a great chin, then he could win that fight. Otherwise, I could see Forrest winning the fight again. Forrest is always in great shape. Ortiz's cardio has been kind of questionable in his last few fights, and I wouldn't be surprised if Ortiz wins the first round, because he always comes out strong in the first round, and then eventually Forrest takes over. But I don't think Forrest will be as easy to take down as he thinks, because I think, and if my memory serves me right, Forrest's wrestling improved quite a lot when he fought Rich Franklin. Rich Franklin isn't Ortiz in wrestling, but you did see an improvement there. And I think that Forrest will eventually win by decision. The rest of the card, Cote and Kung Lee. Looking forward to it. I think Cote might win that fight. I don't see Kung Lee knocking out Cote. Cote has a great chin. It's his first fight back in the UFC. I know he's had some fights outside. Cote's got a good chin, and he's got a heavy right hand. He could knock him out. And Lee has been knocked out in fights. And Lee, he kind of came a little bit too soon. He's an exciting fighter, but it would have been interesting to see what he would have been had he been in the UFC when he was in his prime. If you watch some of his Sancho fights and his fights, before, when he was shredded to pieces and just so quick and so fast and dynamic, and he still is quite dynamic, but you can see the age, and he's not as lean and as shredded as he used to be. He's a lot thicker now. I think it's going to be an exciting fight, though. I do think that. And I wouldn't be surprised. The best weapon for Lee is to throw kicks to the arms and to the body. That's his greatest weapon. He's done that before. That's how he beat Frank Shamrock. So that will be interesting. And really, that's all I'm going to say for now, because I've got to kind of wrap it up. I've got a ton of things to do in the house, and I better do them before, I get barked at and yelled at. So write what you think. Tell me what you think's going to happen. Silva, Sonnen number 2. Who you think's going to win? How they're going to win? Anything else you want to ask? And I guarantee I'm going to be doing another video pretty soon, because I want to talk about Quentin Rampage Jackson, because I've got a lot of things to say about that guy. So I'm going to stop right here. Write some comments, rate, subscribe, and share. And I will see you all very soon.